are thrilled to have you join us tonight. My name is Lisa Novak, and it is a true privilege to be the moderator of this evening's panel discussion. I'm a board member of this wonderful organization, CATCH, Community Action Together for Children's Health, and it is our mission and true passion to help empower families in our community to raise resilient children, though we didn't quite realize we'd be taking on this challenge during a global pandemic. One of the only constants in 2020 has been its ubiquitous uncertainty. Uncertainty regarding our health and safety, our children's education, and how to best protect our kids, both physically and emotionally, during these unparalleled times. We're faced with endless new decisions in our day-to-day lives, and few, if any of us, feel equipped to make the best or right choices. While I wish I could promise you definitive answers to allay all of your concerns this evening, we know by now that that's likely not possible. What I do hope, however, is that you leave tonight with a new perspective on how to navigate these choppy waters and additional tools in your toolbox for managing challenges as they continue to arise. In just a moment, I'm going to turn this over to the three fabulous women who will be answering your questions, each from their unique professional lens, but just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Tonight's program will be recorded, and links to the video will be accessible through CATCH's website and social media page. Also, there is no audio or video streaming from your end, so don't worry if you've joined us in your jammies. We received several really great questions ahead of our event, and we will try to address each of them tonight. However, don't worry if you didn't submit your questions ahead of time. You can use Zoom's chat function on the bottom of your screen to ask any questions as they arrive this evening. I will be monitoring the chat with the help of a few of my behind-the-scenes CATCH friends to make sure that we try to get to as many of your questions in the next hour as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to each of the panelists to introduce herself and her practice, and then ask each of them a question to get the conversation started. Okay, so why don't we start here with our first panelist, our pediatrician, Dr. Jessica Rappaport.
Hi, I'm Jessica Rappaport. I am a mom of 2 middle schoolers and a pediatrician. I have a concierge pediatrics practice in Winnetka.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Rappaport. We're so excited to have you here.
Thank you.
So our first question for you tonight is that parents have expressed concerns about mask breaks at school. Can you share your thoughts about safety or risk during lunch and recess or other times that kids have their masks off?
Sure. So obviously there's a couple of things that we know that help prevent this disease. One is masking, and the other is one of many others is social distancing. So kids who are in school all day probably benefit from mask breaks. Outside is better than inside. If they have to eat inside and the mask's off, the kids really need to be socially distanced at least 6 feet, if possible more. There's just a lot more aerosolization and spray during laughing and talking and eating, and it does, if the kids are too close together, it does increase the risk.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, next up we have our panel's educational advocate, Margot Andersen.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I am a social worker, and I've been an educational advocate specializing in special education for the last 23 years. I'm also a teacher of mindfulness practices and teach my clients tools for resilience.
Wonderful, Margot. Thank you so much. My question for you is, what advice can you offer to parents expressing concern that their children either have already seemingly regressed academically in the spring or might be showing some signs of academic regression this fall?
So we know that kids missed out on the second half of last year, and not that they missed all of their academic instruction, but they overnight went to remote learning. So it's no surprise that they may have regressed with some of their skills. All children regress over the summer, and we're all in hybrid situations. Some of our children are back in school, some of them are still doing remote learning. We're only about 4 weeks into the semester. So I would advise everybody to chill out, take a breath. This is all new for everybody. And unless your child really seems to be way behind, because everybody's behind, so we're normalizing the playing field because everybody's behind a little bit. Unless they really appear to have lost a lot of their skills, I'd advise you all not to be that concerned and to just really take a breath and help them move forward in their new setting.
Wonderful, thank you. And last but certainly not least is our panel's clinical psychologist, Dr. Rachel Riley Fancher.
Hi, I'm a clinical psychologist with a private practice in Skokie near Old Orchard Mall. I'm also the mom of a 2- and a 6-year-old.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us as well. My first question for you is that it's no surprise that parents are working through their own anxiety right now. Do you typically encourage parents to speak openly about their own worries with their children, or is it better for them to mask their emotions, pun intended, to protect their kids?
It's a good question. And one we get a lot from parents actually is, should I just pretend like everything is okay so that they're not scared? Do I talk to my kids about it? And I think it's actually very important for parents to not totally hide what's going on. I mean, developmentally appropriately, of course, you want to be able to have other people that you're going to for support, not expecting that from your kids, but your kids are little sensing machines and they know when something's wrong and they know if you're worried or upset. And so if they come to you and they ask, then you don't want to invalidate their reality. You always say, yeah, you know what, I am feeling a little bit worried and I'm feeling a little sad about what's going on, or just kind of being able to let them know that yes, what they're experiencing makes sense and it's okay for them to feel that way too, and modeling how to cope, talking to your kids and saying, yeah, I'm feeling a little bit sad or stressed today, but this is what I'm going to do about it. Maybe we can go for a walk, and showing them that you're human and the whole range of human emotions is okay, and that we can get through this is really important.
Wonderful, thank you. So some of the questions this evening, I think, are going to be a little more targeted, related to education or physical health or mental health. Others seem to sort of span the board here. And one question that we got a few times in advance of this evening is something that I'm wondering if a few of you can speak to. The question is about video games and television watching and how we're supposed to be managing that screen time with our children, given the fact that many are now on their screens way more than they used to be just for educational purposes. Should they be on their screens less for personal use? And on the flip side of that, if they're actually getting a lot of their socialization from video gaming with friends, how do we manage that cost benefit analysis?
I think one of the ways that I help families think about that is that there's not necessarily a magic number as to the number of hours they should or shouldn't be on, but what else is there in their life, and do they have a balanced life, and are the screens starting to take over? So are they moving their bodies every day? Are they socializing with friends and family in whatever way they can? Are they reading? Are they doing their schoolwork? Do they have a balanced life? And if you notice that they're starting to withdraw or that the screens are starting to take over some of those things, that's usually when there is cause for concern.
I'm going to answer that in a slightly adding to what Dr. Fancher said. I'm going to add a couple of things. Our students are really being forced to be online for X number of hours a day, and they get some screen time breaks. But I know I've heard from my 11-year-old granddaughter and my 7-year-old granddaughter that that's their social time also, to be able to interact with friends on the screen. I know my 7-year-old has play dates and my 11-year-old has time allocated for friends. So it is a tough balance because under normal circumstances, they wouldn't be online all day long, but these are not normal times. So I like the fact that we have to watch what they're doing, encourage all sorts of activities, exercise, etc. But they are right now, because they're not in school with their friends, they're starved for social interaction, and this may be that only vehicle for that.
I agree. You both made excellent points. I don't have a ton to add there. I think, it really depends on the child and how easily they can disengage, how much socialization they're getting, and then how easily they can disengage, particularly with a video game. I'm less concerned about kids Zooming or FaceTiming with each other because they're face to face and they're seeing each other. Games are a way that kids socialize a lot now, but it is really heavily child dependent.
Thank you. Dr. Rappaport, I think this one's probably largely for you. We are encroaching very closely here on flu season, and one parent was wondering, how do we differentiate between COVID symptoms and flu symptoms, and what should parents be doing first and foremost if their child is exhibiting any type of symptom of illness?
It's a fantastic question without an easy answer. I think honestly, truly the only way to distinguish between COVID and the flu is to test for both. There are tests available for both COVID and flu. Based on symptoms alone, I don't know honestly that we're going to be able to distinguish the way that we would normally speak to someone on the phone and assess their symptoms and make a recommendation as to coming in and testing. I think it's going to be a year where more people, in order to distinguish between the two, and it's important to remember also that they're not mutually exclusive. You could have both. Is to just see your pediatrician or your physician and get tested. And then I'll also put in just a quick plug, please get your flu shot.
Excellent, definitely, thank you. Okay, we've got a question here for, actually this is probably another one that several can address. Maybe we'll start with Dr. Fancher on this one. Lots of questions about children becoming just too socially isolated right now. Many are not in school at all, and it feels different when they are. Many of their extracurricular activities have been canceled for now. And so how can we help children stay socially connected during these difficult times?
It's a good and hard balance. I think that it depends on the age of the child, and to some extent, there are some benefits of some of the slowness, of some of the pressure being pulled off in certain places. So I think it's always good when we think about the losses and the hard parts of this, that there can be benefits to children being able to have a little bit more space. In terms of what do we do? How do we get them to socialize? The weather is beautiful right now, and being able to be outside and being able to see people physically from a safe distance is wonderful, because it is qualitatively different, for kids to be able to see each other's faces in person. In order to really be able to facilitate this in the winter, a lot of it is going to be virtual. And that goes back to screen time. But it is something that, I think Dr. Rappaport really made a good point, that it does depend on the type of screens, and socialization with screens is positive. Something else to consider, though, is that this is temporary. We don't know what temporary looks like, and we just kind of have to radically accept that right now this is what's happening, but that children are incredibly resilient. So they will likely bounce back and be okay. Kids' brains are very plastic. Things can change, they can adapt, and they find ways. And they also have, their parents, and they have siblings if they have siblings. And these things are not lost. We're social beings, and that's an innate drive. So it's not something that's going to be lost and they're going to forget how to do things, socially. So I think being able to allay some of those fears and know that once we're able to go back to life as we knew it, hopefully, that they'll be able to pick back up.
Margot, this one's for you. How can schools help their remote learners in either a hybrid or an opt-out environment continue to feel like they're part of the school community? And is there anything they can do or ask their teachers to do?
Good question. I think we're all still kind of feeling our way through that. I know that for my 7-year-old, they encourage lots of social time for recess, PE, music, and they try to connect. I know that she's had play dates with her classmates after school. I think the teachers are trying their best to try to facilitate friendships and interactions within the classroom setting. I'm sure as kids get older and in the upper grades, there'll be more group projects, more of a chance for breakout rooms. And And I think that's really what we're going to be looking at for the near term. If your child is really feeling isolated and struggling, I would definitely email the teacher and try to engage the teacher and let the teacher know what's going on. I've heard it both ways. I've heard parents say, my child is crying because he wants to go to school. I've heard parents say, my child is crying because he doesn't want to go to school. So I think it's so individualized right now, including the choice whether to go to school or not. So you really have to kind of know your child. And I always encourage parents to trust their gut. If they sense that something is off, go to the teacher. And if they feel that there's more that needs to be addressed, they can either see the school social worker or certainly engage in an outside therapist as well.
Thank you. You know, you touched on a really good point there, just about parents making a lot of decisions here. Sometimes the child is upset because they do have to go to school. Sometimes they're upset because they don't get to go to school. And that's something that's come up a lot as well, is that children are angry at their parents for the decisions that their parents are making in these, you know, impossible lose-lose type choices. And, you know, I'm curious about whether that's something that should continue to be sort of hashed out within the family. You know, one parent asked, should I continue to address this in any way or just leave it be and let my child vent? And how do we, you know, manage the fact that maybe our neighbors or our children's friends' parents aren't making the same decisions that we are?
I think part of that comes down to every family has a different level of risk tolerance, and also other factors that may come into play. Maybe a grandparent lives with them and, you know, is ill or elderly. There's just a lot of factors, and everybody's situation is unique. And I think we just have to, you know, whatever decision you make for your own family, you have to own that decision and feel okay with it. And it might change. This is a really situation in flux at all times. New information is coming out all the time, and it's constantly changing. So I think parents need to make the decision that's best for their family, own it and feel okay, not feel badly that they're keeping their kids in and their next door neighbor is having, you know, play dates in the house and whatever. Everybody's decision is their own. They need to own it, and then they need to explain to the kids, listen, you may not agree with this decision, but I'm the adult and this is what has to happen right now. I understand that you're disappointed that you can't play, but your neighbor can, but this is how it is.
I totally agree. You know, I think one of the things that I'll often talk to parents about is that you're the parent and you get to set the boundary, and your kid gets to be upset about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that it's okay if your child is unhappy with this. You know, we're unhappy about a lot of boundaries and restrictions that have been placed with us too. And I think being able to hear them and being able to talk with them is really important. But then, you know, you drive the ship.
And to add to what's been said, you know, I think it's just critically important, no matter what age the child is, to sit down and explain what the reasons are for whatever decision you've had to come to based on the risk tolerance in the family and the family's unique set of needs. I know that my 11-year-old was very involved in the decision whether she should go back to in-person school or do remote learning based on illness in the family, et cetera. And her buy-in was completely different because she was involved in the decision.
Right. I think, you know, obviously uncertainty is just a huge part of all of this right now, and helping to empower kids to feel like they have some sense of agency when, you know, control feels like it's been stripped away is huge. You know, and that's, I guess, part of this too, you know, giving children a sense of agency and decision-making in their own lives to the extent that we can, and also knowing that they can't make all of their own decisions or be completely independent through this. One parent asked here, can you speak to the impact of this unexpected pandemic and all of its changes and uncertainties in terms of positive impact that it might have on our children, things like, resilience or other skills that they may and will hopefully be building during this time?
Yeah, I think looking at the positive pieces to this is excellent. It can be hard sometimes, but I do think there are some positives that are coming out of this. I think that we are being made to slow down, which I think in our society we're not very good at. I think we're being made to look a little bit more at the things that we are grateful for, the things that we do have. There's a lot of research that mindfulness, right, like being in the moment, and gratefulness, recognizing what we do have and appreciating it actively, are really important skills for well-being. So I think these are great things that kids and families are hopefully learning how to do more presently and actively every day. And I think too that being able to not have such a big pace, some kids have been traditionally so scheduled, right? They've got things all the time, and that's just the way that it was. And now there's been an abrupt halt to that. And I think that while we may not choose this when we have, the ability to choose, we may be more mindful about what we choose to give our time to and what we choose not to. And I think that's a real gift from this as well.
Another gift that I see is I think all of us are change averse. As humans, none of us like change, though we're all supposed to love it and welcome it, but it's hard. And this was thrust upon us overnight. There was no preparation for this. So if we look at the research, we know that adversity comes into everybody's life, and how you bounce back from adversity is your level of resilience. And so we've all been thrown into adverse conditions for all of us, things we're not used to, and we've had to adapt. And our kids are watching us adapt, and they're learning to adapt. And they understand too that things are changing constantly. So they are learning to go with the flow, which is a tremendous life lesson, and will build that resilience for future life.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hearing themes of sort of just getting back to roots and values. That flexibility is huge. I think we can be fairly rigid as a society sometimes, and I can speak for myself personally here, but really having to bend with the wind and navigate this as it's constantly evolving, I think is absolutely paramount. Here we have a question for Dr. Rappaport. Schools are obviously using a lot of cleaning supplies to keep our schools safe and sanitized, but we know that harsh chemicals can adversely impact our children's health and immune systems. Is the increased exposure to chemicals in the schools something we should be concerned about for our children?
I think that's a very good question. And obviously each school and daycare and location is going to use its own sort of cleaning methods and cleaning solutions. The CDC has a list of approved solutions for, approved chemicals for killing COVID. And that's what should be used in the schools. It is hard, I understand, especially with younger kids who may touch things and put, hopefully they're masking, but putting things in their mouths or touching their face and exposure to chemicals. I think when things are thoroughly cleaned and then dried in between, I think from a risk benefit standpoint, the sort of heavy duty cleaning that's going on now, the benefits of that far outweigh any potential risks.
Great, thank you. And then just to go back to, you had mentioned the flu shot earlier. Somebody's asking here, when are flu shots most effective? I've heard to wait until October. Is it too early to do it now?
That is a great question. There's no perfect time to do flu shots this year. We like, in general, we like to have them done by the end of October. That's sort of the recommended timeline. Have everybody vaccinated by the end of October. This year in particular, just to help hopefully protect from the flu, so there's less instances of, is this flu, is this COVID? The recommendation is to just vaccinate as soon as possible. So as soon as it's available in your doctor's office, it's recommended to get the flu shot for yourself and your kids. The other point that I was on a different call with an infectious disease specialist who said, listen, we really don't know when the flu is going to hit, when and if the flu is going to hit every year. So there's no harm. There's no magic time to wait until it's best to just get it as soon as it's available, specifically by the end of October if possible.
Excellent, thank you. What do we want to look for in a mask that my young child will have to wear all day to school?
That's a great question. Probably the masks are supposed to be triple layer if possible, but probably the most important thing for compliance with mask wearing is a mask that fits your child well and is comfortable. There's a lot of masks for kids that have adjustable side pieces for the ears and like a little metal piece that bends over the nose to sort of mold to their faces. You know, there's a million different types of masks, but you really want to find one that your child will wear. It's really been amazing to me how compliant kids have been with masks. It just speaks to their resilience, which you, the other touched on earlier. You know, I think everybody was very concerned about how are we going to get these kids to wear masks? How are they going to wear masks all day? And it's been unbelievable that kids are just wearing them and seeming to do just fine. Obviously, they slip down and things, but it's just been amazing.
Great. And Dr. Rappaport, we're going to pick your brain with a few more mask questions while we're at it, and then we'll shift gears here. One question we got was if a child has either sensory needs or anxiety or something that actually is causing them to chew on their masks and their masks are getting really wet, do we know if they're still effective, or is that something we should be concerned about?
It's hard. There are, you know, certainly for kids with sensory issues, with oral, you know, oral sensory issues that like things in their mouth and chew on things, it's an issue where they get wet. Ideally, the masks should be dry. So for a child who does a lot of chewing, depending on their age, if it's safe for them to chew on something else, like for an older child who maybe isn't, doesn't have severe special needs, but has some sensory issues, if allowed, they can chew gum under their mask. You know, if it's safe for them, because that keeps the mask from, it keeps them from wanting to chew on the mask. If the mask does get wet, it's recommended to change it. So for a child who can't chew gum or can't control themselves, it's helpful at school to have a large supply of masks to just switch it out as needed.
Awesome. And then I'm not done with you yet.
Okay.
Assuming that chewing on the mask is not the issue, just more broadly speaking, how often do we need to wash our masks? Is it okay to keep a mask in the car and just take it on and off as needed as we run quick errands over a couple of days? And also to that similar point, are disposable masks able to be reused, or are they truly just a one-time use?
Those are great questions. A cloth mask should be washed every time it's used. So if your child goes to school and wears a cloth mask, they should come home, put it right in, you know, everybody in their own house, we've sort of figured out a system where our kids come in, they put the mask in this little mesh bag that I attach to our washing machine with a magnet. It goes right in there, they wash their hands, and then we start over. But having some kind of sort of mask management program in your house is very helpful. So cloth masks should be washed every day. Technically, you know, like a disposable mask or a surgical mask, they're originally made to be, they're disposable. They're meant to be used once. There's less of a shortage of those now. They're easier to for the public to find too, even at drugstore and whatever. So I think the official recommendation would be like, yes, those are disposable, but if you you know, if you go into a store and then you're going to drive somewhere and you have to go into another store, I think if you either leave that mask on or you carefully remove it from the ear loops without touching the mask with your hands, which is how you're supposed to put on and take off the mask anyway, you can put it in like a brown paper lunch bag in between and then put it back on. If the mask is soiled, frayed, it absolutely needs to be thrown away.
Thank you. I will relieve you of your duty for a moment, Dr. Rappaport. I appreciate it. Another question that came in, if this pandemic continues and our children continue to live these uncertain lives at home and at school, are we expecting there to be long-term psychological consequences? Does the lengthier amount of time that this goes make it worse or deeper for our children?
I assume that one's coming to me. Is that
Why not?
We don't know. And of course, that's a frustrating answer to this from a psychologist, but we don't have a lot of data to say that the length that this goes is necessarily going to make it worse for our kids. In some ways, the longer that this is going, we're finding ways to adapt, and hopefully children are finding ways to stay engaged in things that are meaningful to them, and that it's becoming less acute, right? In the beginning, March, April, everything was very acute, everything was very scary. And now that acute level is coming down, and we're learning how to adapt and to live through this. So the longer it goes, I don't think we necessarily have evidence that it's going to be worse for our kids. Now, if we're getting into the 3, 4, 5 year mark, but I'm hopeful that's not what we're looking at. And it's not even so much that would be correlated with anything in particular, but it would just vastly change our outcome, right? We just don't know. We don't have the research around it. But I do think that right now we can't control it. We can't plan for how long this is going to be. And I think that those are kind of mental games that we sometimes find ourselves getting into. Okay, well, if I can do this for 3 more months, or I can do this for 6 more months. And ultimately, we're trying to do that to make ourselves feel better, but it's a losing battle because we just don't know. We're trying to control. And I think that's the thing, that anxiety and control are like 2 sides of the same coin. When we feel anxious and nervous about something, we try to control it, and we can't use that right now. And control is always an illusion, right? We don't know that we're going to get in our car and go somewhere and come back safely. Anything can happen, but usually it's fine. And so we just live with that. And I think right now we're not able to do that. And that's really tough. So what I would encourage people when they start to feel really nervous about that, are there going to be long-term consequences? Look at the other side of it. Could things be okay, right? Maybe we're going to get through this and everything will be fine. Kind of balance the scales on both sides of it, that we don't know, but let's try to focus in that we don't have research that it's definitely going to be something that is incredibly harmful for our kids either.
I'm going to add to that. We all have heard of the term post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, in the last 10 years or more, there's also been a new body of research called post-traumatic growth. And what they're finding is that people who do go through, bona fide traumatic events, oftentimes certainly will go through a stress period and may experience anxiety, depression during their normal healing period from whatever event it was that happened. But that the long-term piece of it is that they grow, find different meaning in life, and that their skill sets are changed, and their whole sense of outlook on life is different, better, and changed. So if you think about that, that's just a more hopeful way too, and a more positive way to look at the stress that our kids and we are going through, and that we may emerge as different and better.
I appreciate all of those responses. And I think it lends itself to another question that maybe each of you can have your perspective on, because I'm guessing your own clients or patients come to you at various points in the process. But we know some children are going to be a little bit more resilient and be coping with this a little bit better. Others might not be. How do we know what point at which a child really needs professional help, where this goes from something we're all kind of struggling with but managing to, my child really needs more support right now?
So some of the signs that I talk to parents about are sleeping, eating, social withdrawal, and changes in terms of the way that they are managing their emotions. So first, sleep. Or do they have some vast changes in their sleep? Are they eating normally? Are they eating more? Are they eating less? Are they engaging with peers and family? Of course, it's not exactly the same, but do they still have that drive? Do they still want to do those things? Do you see them really withdrawing? Do you see them not wanting to see people, spend time with people, not want to come join the family? And this is a change, right? This is because we're talking about, like, 2-year-olds to 18-year-olds. So it's going to look a little bit different with all kids. But I think looking at these things, and then also, are you noticing that they're either really shutting down or that they're having really big outbursts? Some level of regression is totally normal right now. Kids are stressed, and when we are stressed, kids kind of act out visibly sometimes the way that we feel internally, right? Like if we could see what we felt, it maybe would look like what our kid is doing in that moment, especially younger ones. So knowing too that some level of regression, if a kid was completely toilet trained and they're regressing a little bit, if there were kids who have mastered certain things and they're struggling with it, some level is normal. If you are that gut, that Margot talked about before, that's really important for a parent too. Like if you just feel like something is really off, it's worth having it checked out.
Mm-hmm. And I'll add to that. I wouldn't just only look at the child and the child's behavior. If you as the parent are starting to struggle and your fuse is much shorter, you're ready to explode at the end of the day, because you're not only being asked to be a parent now, and a working parent, you're also being asked to be a teacher. So clearly, your demands are much greater. And if you're finding that you're much more frustrated with perhaps even the same levels of behavior that your child is exhibiting from last year, then you may need help as a family, or you may need help as a parent.
Thank you. Margot, I have a question for you here. I think many parents are finding that their children, particularly when engaged in the remote part of learning, whether it's exclusively remote or on hybrid days, are just not very engaged in their schooling. And there may not be a lot of other symptoms. Perhaps socially and emotionally, they seem to be doing okay, but they're either just refusing to do their work or so just distracted and disengaged. How do we conceptualize that, and what can we do about that if we want them still learning?
Great question. Again, keeping in mind it's the beginning of the year, but if you see a big change in your child's behavior in terms of engaging with their teacher, engaging in class, or refusal to participate, or refusal to even go to school, that is clearly time to contact the teacher, perhaps have a discussion about whether or not the school social worker or psychologist needs to be involved. And if there's a big enough change, the teacher may agree that there needs to be an evaluation of sorts to really assess whether it's the material that's challenging the child in a way that needs different kinds of interventions or attention, or if it's just, simply behavioral. Certainly, there are many interventions that teachers are used to practicing for students that have attentional issues, ADHD, or et cetera. And they should have offerings for you as a parent to help mitigate those while the student is at home. But again, if you as a parent have exceeded your threshold, your frustration level, et cetera, to keep the child engaged, you need to partner with the school. The school needs to know that because they need to be concerned. It's your right to have an education. And if the child is not engaged, then the school needs to partner with you and take that to the next level.
Thank you. to piggyback on that, just another question for you, Margot. I think we're largely talking about gen ed students here, and my first question about, worrying that a child was regressing potentially academically was related to the gen ed environment. But what about parents of special education students and students who have IEPs or 504 plans and are feeling right now that at no fault of anyone's, because the teachers certainly are trying their very best, but potentially in a remote learning environment or whatever the case may be, their child is not getting all of the service minutes in their IEP or not getting the same kind of individualized interventions that they used to get. How are we helping families navigate that right now?
Great question. We are all feeling our way through murky waters. Many school districts have hybrid offerings. They may have either in-person learning 2 days a week or 3 days a week, etc. If I have a student that has an IEP and is clearly not getting the interventions to the level that they need, I will advise a parent to ask for an IEP meeting and see if they can do more in-person schooling to get the student in the building. Some schools are calling their special ed students in 5 days a week. Some schools 3 days a week. Some schools are pulling in for special services like speech and language or reading only for that number of minutes, and they're pulling the student in. There is such a wide variety. Again, I would say to parents, trust your gut. If you know that your student is supposed to have 150 minutes of reading per week, reading instructional time, and they're not getting it, ask for an IEP meeting and note that with the district and see what remedy they offer.
Great, thank you. Dr. Rappaport, I thought you were off the hook with my mask questions, but I have one more here. A parent wrote in here, we were told to wear masks in order to flatten the curve, which collectively we have as a country, but research has suggested that children are not spreaders of this virus. Why should we continue to require them to wear masks?
Children are known spreaders of the virus. That may have been a thought early on. Initially, we thought maybe children were not spreading it as much. It is known now that children can spread it as easily as adults can. So masks are critical.
Good, thank you. Okay, let's see what we have next here. This is just a general question that anyone can take here. It seems like some people are getting quarantine fatigue. How do we keep up our strength to hang on for the long haul of COVID-19?
Great
Just a
question.
lot of deep sighs here.
Great question. I'll vote for mindfulness practices. Stay present. I encourage people to try to find hobbies and crafts. I'm sure most of the parents on this call are looking at me thinking, time to do a craft? You must be kidding. But self-compassion is key. You need some me time. You need some me time, moms. And try to do things that fill you up and give you some joy.
I think this fatigue is real, right? We've all been doing this for what we thought would be a short time, and now it's turned out to be a long time, and we don't know how much longer we're going to be doing it. So it is something that, what we have had some exposure, like some families, they are testing their bounds of their risk tolerance. And I think one of the things that's important is to think about your values and to think about what is important to me, what do I value, being cognizant and mindful of our choices. Am I okay with this choice? What are the pros and cons? And that's the best we can do, if being mindful of what it is that we're choosing in the moment, and that it's a long-term cost benefit analysis, but recognizing that, collective health is very important. And because we are tired of this doesn't mean that it is any less dangerous.
Exactly. I think you both touched on a really important point, which is sort of being kind to yourself. Be kind to your kids, but be kind to yourself too. Some days are easier than others. We can all do hard things. Some days are harder than others, and some days kind of don't work out well. But tomorrow's a new day, and I do find myself reminding parents a lot in the office to just not be so hard on themselves. Like right now, we're just all doing the best we can.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Here's an academically based question related to reading here. Is there any research on backlash from when a child is pressured to learn to read at school? My 8-year-old son is so distraught about reading under pressure. He frequently says he's stupid and can't read school texts. But then I walk by his room and see him happily reading on his own. When we go to the library, he walks out with a dozen books in his hand. My gut says this is an anxiety thing. I'm curious to hear the experts' thoughts on grade level reading.
Margot, I think you're probably best to answer the grade level part, and I can speak to the anxiety piece.
Okay. Most students around here have academic testing of some sort at the beginning of the year for math and reading, whether it's MAPS or STAR or whatever it is. You should have some indication as to where your student is with respect to grade level reading. And if you don't get it through standardized testing at your school, you should be able to ask your teacher. If there is a lot of resistance to reading at school, I think something else is going on. Either a lot of kids, sometimes there are timed reading things, and kids really object to the timed tests or that kind of reading fluency. That can be mitigated by just saying the student doesn't do well with timed tests, eliminate the timing of the tests, and see if they enjoy reading more. If it progresses more than that, to the student really resisting reading in school, then I might ask the school to do a simple evaluation of their reading and just see where they're at with respect to grade level reading. And the real important thing is, do they enjoy reading? And if they're pulling out 12 books from the library that are commensurate with their reading ability, that tells me that something's going on in school with the way they're presenting reading, but not necessarily. There could be an issue. There could be a learning disability, and that may need to be teased out more fully.
So that was one of the things that I was thinking, ruling out a disability, because it can feel so frustrating to kids if there is something going on and they don't know, or it's not caught. I think one of the things that I heard too is a sense of that labeling of themselves, right? Like, I am, whatever the child is calling himself, but I am bad, I am stupid, I am, I'm always really mindful of that with my clients, because it's something that the child is not bad, stupid, any of those things. It is a behavior that is challenging for them. And I think that language is really important as parents and teachers and just people in the community to be able to notice and to separate out self from behavior. They're two totally different things. So I think that as a parent is something that you can do, to be able to talk to your child and say, okay, let's talk about this. I wonder, what's going on? This is challenging, but you're not that, whatever the negative thing is that they're calling themselves. This question about anxiety, I would wonder if it is isolated to reading. Is it only in this one place that you see it? Is it in other areas too? That could help to kind of differentiate. Is this a reading specific issue, or is this more about being worried about what other people could think, being worried about something with peers, being worried about pressure or time? So there are lots of different things depending on the child that you could look at, but those are kind of the pieces that I would think about initially. And then, absolutely, you could always bring them in for an evaluation of any sort to be able to get a little bit of peace of mind around it as well if you're worried.
Supposed to play the role of moderator tonight, but I'm going to throw my 2 cents in on this one as well. Yeah, I think if the child really loves to read when they're reading independently, likely they can read. I've worked with many children who struggle to read aloud, and as a few of the panelists have already said, it does seem more like a social anxiety, that it's a fear of embarrassing themselves or tripping over a word or making a mistake, and that there might be a theme with, they don't like to volunteer in class altogether, or if you ask them, like, do you sit in class nervous that the teacher's going to call on you to provide a response, they're like, mm-hmm. And so I think just helping to talk the child through that and break it apart. And if that is what it is, I think part of the root of the question was, like, should we be forcing this child to read aloud, or can that have adverse effects? And my personal thought on that is that let's help them allay whatever anxieties they have about that without just pushing them through, because I think we might inadvertently increase their anxiety if we do that. I will return to my role as moderator now. Sorry, ladies. Okay, I've heard a comparison of the pandemic to people living through war situations for extended periods. Do you think that that's an accurate comparison?
I do.
Anyone?
I think it's a fair metaphor. I really do. I think we're living through extraordinary times, and we are being called upon to do extraordinary things that are not typical for us. And I've thought a lot about what it must have been like during World War II, and wondering if this is our, great generation adversity, if you will. And I definitely think there are some similarities with life and death, uncertainty, not knowing when it's going to be over.
Shortages, not just of toilet paper back in the day,
Yes,
but of
right.
medical supplies that are needed.
Uh-huh.
There's still shortages of things that I have difficulty getting, things that are much more expensive than they were before. I would see that similarity.
Yeah, I mean, these are things that we have never experienced.
I think one of the things about things that are traumatic and unexpected too is that they shatter our worldview, and that's one of the most insidious things that we were bopping along late February, early March, and then all of a sudden something happened that we had no control over, and that completely changed our lives. And I think that is something that can really truly affect people in a similar kind of way as a war, that we have this sense of security, and that's really been shattered. And what has replaced it is a chronic sense of stress. And that is incredibly challenging, and it affects us deeply, and it affects our kids in lots of different ways.
And, to that point, I think one of the other major impacts that this pandemic has been financial for so many families. Mm-hmm. One parent just wrote in and asked, how much should I share with my child about the financial repercussions of the pandemic on families, especially those who are living paycheck to paycheck before the pandemic? And who might be a part of the 11 million people who are unemployed. I know this should be handled in an age-appropriate way, but it feels important to create a sense of empathy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, I think that being honest with our kids in developmentally appropriate ways is so important. I think as parents, and particularly, I think parents in our area to some extent have this desire to protect, right? This desire to shield. And it's such a normal parenting desire and response, but it's really important to think about the consequences of that, that we want to not just be raising like happy humans, right? Because that's actually not possible, right? Like we can't be happy all the time. We want to raise humans who can experience the whole range of emotions and process and manage them. And so I think that part of that is empathy and pain and suffering and understanding what other people are experiencing. You know, we don't want to be exposing them to way too much media or media that's not developmentally appropriate for them. But in a way of talking to them and explaining, I think it can be really powerful.
Great, thank
I think
you.
there's a lot of opportunities for helping others that can also help kids learn about empathy, you know, whether it's donating your resources, donating your time, even drawing pictures or making cards for people that are in the hospital that you don't know. Kids can get excited about those things, and it's a small but I think impactful way for them to help.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. I'm aware of the time. We just have a few minutes left and a few last questions. One question for you, Dr. Rappaport, I have here is, you know, as we're heading into the fall, winter, and it's obviously going to be getting a lot colder outside, and we're going to lose the few channels for socialization that we do have. What are your thoughts on air filters? And if we got certain types of air filters in our home, would that make it safe to have play dates in our homes over the winter? And if so, is there a certain type of air filter that we should be looking for that would be most effective?
That's not a question that I'm fully qualified to answer. There are definitely lists with specifics of air filters. I am not prepared to make a recommendation based on that. Again, I think this goes to families' risk tolerance. I think in the winter, we're going to have to be extremely careful about exposure to other people outside of your pod or family or whoever's in your day-to-day life. I think even now, indoor play dates can be risky, and masks should, I prefer outdoor play dates that are socially distant, but I don't actually recommend indoor play dates right now, although there's many people who, again, this goes back to risk tolerance, who feel comfortable with that. I think if you had somebody else in your house, I would highly recommend wearing a mask. I would highly recommend right now having windows open. And even in the winter, if you have the opportunity at times to let a little air from outside circulate into your house, whether it's through an open window or an open door, even for a short period of time, is helpful. Air filters can be very helpful. There are, you know, industrial grade ones that are used in doctor's offices and hospitals. But as far as ones that can be used at home, I'm sure that they exist. I just don't know. I don't know enough to recommend one versus the other.
Thank you. Just, I think, two last questions here. So one is, any advice from any of you really about how to sort of receive your children at the end of the school day, whether the end of the day means coming home from the school building where they've sat in the same space all day long, or whether it means shutting down their Chromebook from their living room or your dining room where they've been sitting, any routines that might be helpful, but also just how to help manage the emotionality that they may be experiencing after such a long, exhausting day.
Yeah, two big things that come to my mind is one, like rhythm or routine, and then two, the fact that parents often get the, you know, hardest, biggest emotional responses from their kids than anybody else. So, you know, I think that kids thrive with structure and they thrive with routine, and that has changed vastly for most children over the past 6 months. So having some, it doesn't have to be something that is incredibly structured or detailed, and it can be flexible, but I think kids knowing what to expect around the same times every day can provide a sense of security for them and for you as a parent, right? Like, this is when we have screen time, or this is when we eat dinner as a family. Just giving that rhythm to the day can provide some structure and some sense of security and safety during a time when we don't have that as much inherently. And then I think also knowing too that your kids are going to emote and they're going to have big feelings, and you're going to see it in a way that maybe their teachers didn't see all day, right? Because they're safe with you, and that's so normal. And I think that's something that being able to, you know, help them to be able to calm their bodies if they're really upset, or, you know, being able to give them some cool down time, you know, figuring out what your kid needs is really important, but we just want to reduce points of conflict, right? So I think that's an important thing too.
Thank you. And then one last question here. I'd like my kids to look back on this crazy time and think about special moments we shared as a family. how do I help us cultivate some special memories, amidst all of the Zooming that we're doing all day long and all of the fatigue that we're experiencing? How do we help take away some positive pieces here?
I think I think the small daily things kind of can add up. I don't know how to create one large memory because we're not doing the same things out of the house or events or things like that. But I think every day trying to find something happy, something funny, something, even just small things that leave you with a sense of, almost like a silver lining of that day. Like, this was a really hard day, but I watched this really funny show, or I read this really great article, or whatever. Just finding joy in the small day-to-day things, I hope can in the long run make people not look back with such negativity.
I ask my clients to keep a gratitude journal, and I ask them to find 3 things that they're grateful for each day. And even if you do that at the dinner table, what 3 things were you grateful for today? And you can't say the same things every day.
Mm-hmm.
For those of us old enough, you guys aren't, but back in my day, we used to have a Rolodex. And if you had to flip through the Rolodex to find somebody's name and their phone number. What you're asking the brain to do, research has shown, is that you are cataloging the last 24 hours and you're searching for the good in the day. We are Velcro for negativity and we're Teflon for positivity because our reptilian brains are wired to keep us safe and to remember the dangerous negative things so that we can stay alive as a species. We don't look for the good, and when we get a compliment, we lose it. When something good happens, it just drifts by. So when you savor the good and you actually seek it, it creates a sense of positivity. That may be a skill that they can take away and remember when they're adults.
Okay, I just want to say thank you to all 3 of you tonight. You were wonderful as expected, and I am sure everyone is so appreciative of you taking the time to answer all these questions. For anyone in the audience right now, if you have any additional questions for any of these wonderful women here, we are going to have all of their information listed in our newsletter that'll go out with a summary of tonight. And here you can find their websites to find them right away, but their email addresses and phone numbers will all be included in the newsletter as well. Thank you all for participating, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We really appreciate you taking the time. Take care.
Thank you for watching. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our Facebook page, follow us on Instagram, or find us at catchiscommunity.org for updated video content and community programming. Catch is dedicated to making a difference in our community through empowering families to raise resilient and independent youth.